Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an incredibly complex, high-stakes legal case surrounding the tragic death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Right at the center of the criminal case against 21-year-old singer David Anthony Burke is this huge, complicated forensic puzzle. We're looking at how investigators use modern technology, that unavoidable digital exhaust we literally all leave behind, to try and prove premeditated murder over a totally accidental tragedy. We're going to break down the exact cell phone data, the vehicle telematics, and all those little digital breadcrumbs the prosecutors are relying on to build their timeline. So let's get right into it. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at Section 1, accident or premeditated murder, 2, tracking the digital breadcrumbs, 3, the Santa Barbara trips, 4, anatomy of a fake alibi, and 5, the forensic verdict. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, accident or premeditated murder. So the legal system heavily relies on two competing theories when looking at what's going on inside a suspect's head versus what they're actually doing. On one hand, you have a crime of passion or a sudden accident. The absolute hallmark of this is an unplanned event, which is usually followed by a completely chaotic, panic-stricken aftermath. The person just doesn't know what to do because, they didn't see it coming. But on the other side, you have premeditated murder. Prosecutors argue that the red flags here are a calculated cover-up, highly logical decision-making, and staging alibis right in the immediate aftermath. The big question this digital evidence is trying to answer is, which of these two patterns does the data actually show? And that brings us to this really specific legal definition. Prosecutors have tacked on a special circumstance allegation called lying in wait. To translate that legal jargon, it basically means they are alleging the perpetrator intentionally lured the victim to their home, already fully intending to kill them. The prosecution's theory, which they laid out in their preliminary hearing brief, is that the suspect was in an illegal relationship with the victim, that she threatened to expose him, and that he lured her there with the intent to kill her just to protect his career. To clear that super high bar of premeditation, prosecutors are pointing straight at the digital data. Moving right along to Section 2, tracking the digital breadcrumbs. So how do they track him? Prosecutors are leaning heavily on what we can call the tracking trio. Honestly, it's the exact same everyday tech most of us carry around and use constantly. First up, iPhone geolocation. Experts are quick to note that even if a suspect thinks they're being super clever by turning their phone off, limited geolocation data can still be pinged and tracked with crazy precision. Second, you have Tesla's cellular data. Modern smart cars are essentially just computers on wheels, constantly talking to cell towers and mapping out a vehicle's movements. And third, traffic and license plate readers, specifically those flock cameras that log cars passing through specific geographic choke points. You put those three together, and you get a virtually airtight map of someone's movements. It is practically impossible to move undetected. That brings us to Section 3, the Santa Barbara trips. The data tells a pretty clear story, that this wasn't just a single frantic drive in the middle of the night. It allegedly shows 3 totally distinct trips to this really isolated area of State Route 154 near Lake Cachuma. The first one happens on the exact night the victim arrived, April 23, 2025, at 11:30 p.m. Then he allegedly goes back a couple weeks later on May 8th, again at 11:30 p.m., and then a third trip on May 31st. Prosecutors are using this documented pattern of calculated behavior over weeks to push back hard against the whole momentary panic defense. Plus, this exact spot on SR 154, that's where the victim's identification card was discovered months later. To really understand this location, let's look at the on-the-ground analysis from private investigator Steve Feiser. He actually flew high-resolution drones out there to map the exact area. He noted that the specific pull-off spot has a gate that's locked tight from sunset to sunrise, which would force a vehicle to stay right near the road. He said, and I quote, "Given how small and weak David is, I do not believe a chainsaw or other heavy evidence would be far into the water. The water is clear, and I was able to see several feet into it." This gives us a really clear picture of the physical terrain and the reality of trying to dump heavy evidence out there in the dark. Okay, so the absolutely crucial point here is this number, 12. There is a stunning 12-day gap between that very first alleged trip to Santa Barbara on April 23rd and the dates when all this disposal equipment was actually ordered. According to the prosecution, it wasn't until early May that items like a blue inflatable pool, body bags, laundry bags, and chainsaws were bought online, all under the fake name Victoria Mendez. This raises some incredibly dark questions. If the victim died on April 23rd, but the disposal tools weren't even ordered for almost 2 weeks, where was the evidence being stored that whole time? Private investigators have pointed out the insane risk of keeping remains at a manager's rental house for nearly 2 weeks with neighbors right next door. Section 4. Anatomy of a Fake Alibi. This is the crux of the prosecution's entire argument for premeditation. It all comes down to this incredibly compressed timeline. According to the state's brief, the victim arrives at the Hollywood Hills home in an Uber at 10:10 p.m. By 10:30 p.m., literally just 20 minutes later, the suspect is allegedly texting the victim's phone. And by 11:30 p.m., the digital data shows his Tesla hitting the road for Santa Barbara. The state's whole point is that there was a mere 20-minute window between her walking through the door and the alibi staging beginning. So at 10:30 p.m., and then again the next day, the suspect's phone sent messages saying, "Where are you?" to the victim's phone. The prosecution's theory here is downright chilling. They allege that these specific unanswered text messages and the phone calls that went with them were completely manufactured. They're claiming he was actively building a digital defense, pretending she had just run off, while simultaneously driving up the 101 freeway to dispose of evidence. And interestingly, after April 26th, he allegedly never even tried to contact her again. And finally, Section 5, the forensic verdict. Let's bring in some expert perspective from retired detective Matt Irvine, who looked closely at this timeline. He states, an accident or crime of passion, it would be hard to imagine that somebody would have the presence of mind to stage an alibi. And that is absolutely vital reasoning. If someone accidentally causes a death, they're usually in total shock. But Irvine is arguing that being way too calculating, too busy, and acting too fast right after a death severely hurts the argument that it was just an unplanned accident. Having the presence of mind to shoot off a fake text while fleeing the scene, that points forensic experts directly toward premeditation. So to wrap it all up, the state's case for premeditation basically rests on this specific suite of actions. You have the instant staging of texts just 20 minutes after she arrives. You've got the rapid, fully tracked drive out to SR 154. You have the coordinated Amazon orders of chainsaws and body bags, all under the fake alias Victoria Mendez. And then prosecutors point to this totally chilling live stream video from July 4th, weeks after the alleged murder, where the suspect is casually on camera apologizing to friends for the bad smell in his home, brushing it off as just his bathroom. All of these points take the digital breadcrumbs and tie them directly to the prosecution's forensic conclusion that this was a highly calculated cover-up. Which leaves us with this really provocative question to think about. Does a frantic cover-up inherently prove a calculated crime? Defense attorneys are, for sure, going to argue that a person can panic and do terrible things to cover up a tragic accident just out of sheer terror. But prosecutors believe the digital footprint here, the exact timestamps, the GPS pings, the fake names, and those calculated trips, crosses that fine line between the chaotic mess of an accident and the cold, mechanical execution of a crime. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the evidence as this whole case continues to unfold.